Awesome. Then I will start us off and let's have a great conversation, everyone. I'm excited. Let's do this. Sustainability is no longer just a nice to have. It's an imperative, and it's become a fundamental aspect of many companies' identity and their daily work. In today's Silhouette Talk, we'll be taking a closer look at what sustainability actually means, why it matters, and how we can best make it happen. Welcome. My name is Damita Preslev. I'm very excited to be your host today. And I'm also delighted to introduce the people who are with me today. Our model and environmental advocate, Arizona Muse. She has become a leading voice in sustainable fashion and in regenerative agriculture as well. She works with brands to push for transparent, ethical production and draws attention to why consumer choices matter now more than ever. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure already.
Also with me today is Silhouette's Global Brand Director, Atisa Tajidad. She elevates premium brands through strategic development and marketing innovations, and she works at the very forefront of global trends in the luxury eyewear industry. Welcome, Atisa.
Thank you.
To my left, to cover the science for us today, we've brought in Professor Stephen Wallace. He's a professor of chemical biotechnology at the University of Edinburgh, and he does cutting-edge work on transforming renewable resources into valuable chemicals. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure.
And finally, for today, our final guest is somebody who brings a unique perspective from the very front lines of personalized service. Will Amy is the fourth generation already to run the business at Cecil Amy, an independent eyewear group with more than a century of expertise. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we're hosting today's talk in a very special location here at the House of Silhouette. It's the very first one of its kind. It's a place to engage in the Silhouette experience and the perfect setting to explore new perspectives. And today we'll be diving deep into sustainability. We'll be taking a closer look at biocircularity and learning how organic byproducts can actually replace fossil oil. Now, sustainability is kind of the ultimate buzzword. Everybody talks about it, but because sustainability is so difficult to grasp and it can sound very vague at times, it confuses customers. And that feeling of uncertainty translates immediately to purchasing behavior. An international study has actually showed that 72% of people stop buying from a company as soon as there is even the slightest suspicion of greenwashing. So companies really need to show reliable results. And the fashion industry especially has been undergoing a fundamental change for years. Now, Arizona, you know both the world of fashion and the world of sustainability. When producers talk about sustainability and when consumers talk about sustainability, are they talking about the same thing?
I love supply chains. This was my entry point into sustainability. Is I realized that even though I'd been working at the core of the fashion industry as a model, doing campaigns for Estee Lauder and Yves Saint Laurent and Prada, and I didn't know very much at all about where beyond the core of the fashion industry. Where did all of these things come from? And so I went on a learning journey, and I discovered so much, as you can imagine, about all the terrors that are happening along the supply chain of fashion, both for the planet and for people. And I learned that the producers, of course, have much more visibility, but not all the visibility that you'd think than compared to the customers, the consumers who are on this side of fashion, who just see the finished product or the glossy magazine cover. And this is what I feel so passionate about changing, is we can have such an impact on the earth if we decided, like companies like Silhouette are doing, to actually change our production and change the materials that we use, change how we relate to the soil underneath the land that we're all using to grow all of our ingredients or to process everything. And so I think, to answer your question, it does appear differently, sustainability, to the customer than it does to the producers, because there's that knowledge. And this is the knowledge gap that I think is really important to fill. I'm also a customer, and to me, it's really important to know every possible detail about the product that I'm about to buy. It means so much to me, and I find it fascinating. And I don't think I'm the only one in the world who wants to know everything about where things come from.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this gap, right? Because actually, if you look at studies, when people are asked about their values, they overwhelmingly support environmentally sustainable, ethical products. But when you look at buying decisions, many brands have a hard time generating sufficient demand for their sustainable product lines. Atisa, what do you think causes this gap? And more importantly, how can we close it? So what are consumers actually looking for in a sustainable product?
I mean, first of all, in these over 20, 25 years I've been in branding and marketing for high-end luxury brands, I've seen that sustainability becomes more and more important. And in the last 10 years, it's not just a value. When you say, what is changing in terms of consumer behavior, I think it is knowledge. For the consumers nowadays, I think it's a bit difficult to really differentiate about everything what is out there. I think that's within each industry, not only in the eyewear industry, it's in many other industries.
So the more we empower people with this knowledge, the better equipped they are to make purchasing decisions. And so, Will, what does that look like in practice? Because when we think about clothing or food, right, there's green labels that have made it easier for customers to take into account sustainability. Do customers look for sustainable eyewear? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more customers coming in and asking for they tend to use maybe eco or green when they are asking for these products. And again, I think it comes from the more knowledge of trying to be better at what they're doing and with every purchase to them. But I think people do get confused by all these different terms that are thrown around, from sustainable, eco and biodegradable. And as opticians, we get trained in materials from adjusting them and fitting them, but we don't really get trained in how they're made and produced. So with patients getting more education, we also need the people selling the product to know more about them to do the same.
Stephen, maybe that's something that you can clear up for us. So what do the terms on these labels actually mean?
I totally agree with what Will said, actually. I think a lot of these terms are used quite often quite synonymously with each other, and that's confusing to me scientifically. So when we talk about something being green, we're talking about a product or a process that's used to make a product and the effects that has on the environment, resource utilization, energy use, pollution. Sustainability is a much more broader term, encompasses quite a lot of different aspects. Really, what we're asking is the way that we make a product today, does it safeguard the ability of future generations to make that in the same way? So we're talking about fossil fuel utilization in this point because, it's fundamentally unsustainable the way that we make things from fossil fuels currently. When we talk about biocircular, what we're talking about is taking a waste product and retransforming that into another product. And what we're doing in that process is we're diverting material away from landfill or incineration, and at the same time defossilizing the product that you're making. And in that respect, biocircular is sustainable and green at the same time.
Thank you for clearing that up. Now, of course, these labels are one thing to look for, but Arizona, I'm sure there are many others. So what are some aspects that you see people tend to forget when they're looking for a sustainable product to purchase?
The packaging counts a lot as well. A lot of fashion's impact and a lot of each industry's impact is actually what did it arrive in? And how many times was it packaged? So in fashion, I'll give you an example. The raw material is grown on soil in a farm. Let's say it's cotton. Then it has to be baled. So it's wrapped in plastic to be baled, to be sent to the place where it's going to be ginned, which is just getting the burrs and all of any kind of waste not waste, but like anything that's imperfections coming out of it and the seeds coming out of the cotton. Then it gets wrapped again in plastic. So it's already been wrapped twice and packaged twice. And we didn't even think of that when we bought our cotton t-shirt, but it's going to be spun into thread in one factory. Then it's going to be woven into textile in another factory, each time wrapped in plastic. Then it probably needs to be dyed, because at this point it hasn't been dyed yet. It's going to go to a dye house over in India. Then it's going to be wrapped in plastic again. So by the time we buy a finished product, it's often been wrapped and packaged 8 times before we even take the final layer of packaging off. And I think this is one thing that is hidden and we need to think about when we're buying a sustainable product.
That seems like a very important thing to take into account. Yeah, Stephen, what about in your experience? Do you have anything to add? Are there any steps that you feel like people forget about?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I didn't realize that. That's terrible.
Crazy.
It goes absolutely crazy. I think many of these products are very well intentioned, but maybe they're not executed particularly well. And I think just as you were saying, Arizona, I think like considering the entire life cycle of a product, I think is something that people don't consider that often. Energy use is another thing, and I think electric car manufacture is a really good example of that. If something uses vastly more amounts of energy than it has done before, it's not a sustainable product. If you have this wonderful sustainable feedstock that comes from one part of the world and we have to transport it to Europe to make a sustainable product, that product's not sustainable because the carbon emissions that you've emitted along the journey of getting that here just negate everything that happens in a local environment. So like considering the entire life cycle, as we call it, of a product is incredibly important.
It sounds like, Stephen, we're just returning to things that were considered standard maybe a few decades ago.
Yeah, I'd say yes and no to that answer. I think in terms of build quality, craftsmanship, then yeah, absolutely. In terms of the technology that's now available to achieve what we're here to talk about today, absolutely not. So this is a really brand new technology. The biotechnology that's involved in this is quite remarkable. It's just coming out of R&D right now. And we can now recycle materials on a molecular and chemical level, not just a mechanical level. We're not just remolding something into new shapes. These are really advanced upcycling sort of technologies that just didn't exist a couple of decades ago. And I think that's the real differentiation there.
Tisa, what does it feel like to you? Does it feel like you're just sort of going back to old established values?
I mean, established values in manufacturing are craftsmanship, quality, products which endure and can be repaired, and that was always in our DNA. What do we do differently? At the end, we are producing carbon neutral with offsetting since September 2022, and that's, I think, a big achievement, I have to say. And we've never put that so much in the foreground because for us, it's a company value. And it's important for a consumer to know that the company produces in a sustainable and eco-friendly way. And we are also the only one in the industry which is EMA certified, which we got for the first time even 1996. So when you say back to where it all started, this is nearly 20 years ago. We got it again in 2020. What matters is to produce with quality, to produce, in a way that the product itself endures.
And I guess that's what convinced you also to collaborate with Silhouette.
Yeah, I was really won over by the true commitment to sustainability and also the commitment to the future, that you are very open about how there's always room for improvement and you are committed to making those improvements as they become available. And I think that's really important, that we don't ever sit on our laurels. Like, yes, we may have done some important things, but there is always more to do. And that's what's exciting. That's what I love about sustainability is it's this lovely never-ending story of like, how can we always be choosing the best possible option for our planet?
Let's talk about that commitment to the future, because you are a family business in its third generation. And of course, family businesses sometimes have maybe an easier time maintaining their values through the years, through the decades, rather than, risking them over new takeovers, over short-sighted reactions to maybe market developments. How much easier does that make it at Tisa?
When you're family run, and it makes it easier that everybody is committed to one goal, because it's not just something which is put somewhere on a board. It's values everybody believes into. And when we were founded in 1964, and the production then was built, or the manufacturing facilities were built on a water conservation area, then from that point in time, it was already clear that we need to manufacture in a sustainable and environmental protective way. I think also as a family business, when these values are given, from generation to generation, it's a belief which all employees share. It's important to be always future-oriented, and at the same time, we are looking for innovation. And if you want to build the company for the future, and that's the foundation to look for innovation. Because at the time when it was founded 6 years ago, it was founded also on an innovative belief.
I see you're nodding in agreement to a lot of this, Will. I know you're also coming to us from a family business today. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, just agreeing completely on sort of that whole ethos of having everyone within the business singing from the same values and everything. And I feel like when we're sort of choosing what products to stock, we want and we need our other opticians all to believe in the product too. We can't just put something in there that we think looks really nice and feels really nice. The whole ethos of the product and the quality of the product needs to represent the brand and us as a whole as well.
Atisa, the current trend in fashion is to make products from recycled plastic. Why not just use that approach?
Yeah, we wanted to go a step further because we were looking for something which is totally new in sustainability. We as a company did tremendous research together with partners and developed this material and this manufacturing process for the new Clear Sky collection. And Aspix Plus, it's super flexible, first of all, which makes it easy to wear. It's durable, it has UV resistance. And the new material we talk about, which is made of biocircular material, has the same properties as SPX Plus. So SPX Green Plus exactly equals everything in what I just mentioned, with also the addition that it is extremely light. And I just want to show the flexibility, because you take a frame, and this is our bottle trick to sort of show how flexible the materials. The frame is bigger than the neck here of the bottle, and if you would stick it in, you see how the material forms itself.
Impressive.
And when you take it out, it stays in the original form, even though it looks, like this. So it's bending itself. It's pretty impressive, and I think this is, how do you explain it to your...
Yeah, I think it just goes to show that, especially when patients feel something so light, they assume that it is going to be fragile, and you need to build that confidence for someone to commit to a high-end purchase. They don't want to buy something that they use every day that's then going to break on them if a grandchild or something happens. So to be able to demonstrate that actually it can withstand life itself, day-to-day life, is really important. So
that does look incredibly impressive, that experiment.
So, and I think that's what you most often in other industries don't have right now, that the sustainable materials has exactly the same properties than the material prior. And this is where we need to come as a society overall, I think, in all sort of materials, so that the consumer really gets confidence. I buy something which is sustainable, but there's no trade-offs for me in all aspects of the product. So that's the big innovation in our SPX Green Plus material.
And Stephen, maybe you can clarify here, what exactly is the difference between products made from recycled PET and ones that are made of biocircular material?
Yeah, sure. I think when you start to think about recycled PET, I think the first thing that's really important to remember is that PET is still a petrochemical, right? It's great that we're taking it out of circulation or sort of delaying its journey to landfill a little bit, but it is still a petrochemical.
So then obviously from an advocacy perspective, this is the better approach, Arizona, no?
It's definitely a better approach, because also the recycling process is a process itself. And when you're recycling a toxic material, it is a toxic process in itself, and it's very high in energy consumption. So if we can use a material that's already there that isn't a petrochemical material, we are working with an industry, agriculture, normally, that is a much more natural-based industry. Of course, there are literally hundreds of agricultural chemicals that are being sprayed on soil every single day of the year in the name of growing crops. So we need to look at that sector, and it's definitely far from perfect. But it is a natural cycle. In agriculture, everything could go back into soil, and that is the biggest circle in the circular economy, that we are not there yet in the whole fashion industry. I see most circles are like recycling, 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 recycling. And as we're talking about here, there's a bigger circle. And this is the bigger circle, these glasses, because they're coming from a waste material from agriculture.
Yeah, what about the consumer experience, Stephen? So is there a noticeable difference in terms of durability, in terms of comfort between eyewear made from recycled plastic versus from biocircular approaches?
Yeah, I think so. I think they both are very different materials, and therefore they require quite different manufacturing processes. If you think about recycled PET, so PET, as we're talking about, is polyethylene terephthalate, which was developed for use in plastic bottles mainly, right? So it's a very hard, very brittle material, and it has to be quite mechanically manufactured into new products. It's quite an energy-intensive process, as you were talking about, and it doesn't necessarily give you a product that's perfect that comes out the other ends. Whereas with what we're talking about today, this is a biological polymer. It has that retained strength that you would get from biological materials. It can be manufactured a lot easier. The energy use is lower. So you get basically the same ease of manufacturing with added benefits. So I think it's far superior over recycled PET for sure.
Will, what's your perspective on the consumer experience aspect?
Yeah, I think it is completely unique sort of in the industry. And it has been great to have a product that is sort of normal in a way. When we compare to sort of other eco frames and things like that, it just slots straight into where we need it and what people want.
Now, we've already mentioned the circularity aspect. Arizona, you were talking about this huge loop, and this is kind of the holy grail right now, achieving full circularities in many industries, closing this loop, continuously reusing, recycling, regenerating resources. Atisa, how does Silhouette approach this specifically with the Clear Sky collection? So what happens to a pair of Clear Sky glasses at the end of its product life?
We do face a bit the same challenges as all manufacturers, because when you recycle a product, you need to take the original parts apart in order to recycle them. We are pioneers in plug connections, meaning that, for instance, in the hinges, you can just plug them together. We really try to avoid glue as much as possible, which is also important.
And as I understand it, Stephen, from a research perspective, one of the challenges is that materials need to be sorted by type before you can really recycle them. So what's the current state of polymer recycling research? What's preventing us outside of the lab from really fully closing that loop?
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours. Yeah, it's a really exciting time in science right now in this area specifically. So in our ability to deconstruct polymers and plastic materials mainly is coming online commercially right now. And most of the technologies currently are focused on repolymerizing those monomers back into next generation materials. So like second or third generation plastic materials. The major problem with that right now is that those second, third, and nth generation materials are inevitably of lower quality and lower value than the initial polymer is itself. And so you enter, as I mentioned earlier, into this sort of downcycling process where you reuse something of lower and lower quality, and then that just inevitably ends up in landfill or being incinerated at the end. So you're not solving the plastic waste crisis at all. You're just delaying the effects of it. And a lot of research right now has been taking those monomers that come from deconstructed plastic and actually using them for something else. So I'm very much invested in this area of scientific research right now. And we've been developing over the last couple of years microbes that can eat these monomers and turn them into fragrances, turn them into flavorings for food. And of this year, we've been able to turn them into medicine to treat disease. So you can treat disease using plastic waste now, which I think is incredible. But I mean, the bio-upcycling and biocircular technology is very much just coming out of the lab R&D right now. And you were talking about why is this just coming out and not scaled up now? Really, the fact that we're here talking about Silhouette, who's actually commercialized one of these processes already, I think is incredibly impressive, because this is very cutting edge technology that's very much at the early stages of our R&D in industry right now. So the fact they've been able to do that is just amazing.
And I mean, that sounds like we're on the edge of incredibly exciting new developments as well, and very promising research. That must make you feel very optimistic as somebody who cares deeply about sustainability.
It does. I am very optimistic as a sustainability advocate, even though I know a lot. As I said, 10 years of self-education. I know a lot about where we're going in this future and how kind of gloomy it looks actually when you look at the real science and the hard facts about where we're going to be in 10 years, 20, 50, 100 years. It's not good. We're not headed in a good direction. But I do feel really overwhelmingly positive about the people who are in this journey and who are innovating in it and who are leading the way in a commercial aspect. We actually will be able to do this. I would like to see governments coming in a bit stronger though, because right now we're looking at good-hearted, smart scientists, and we're looking at heroes of private companies. But what if everyone did it? I mean, that's a very, very different story. And we will need governments and regulations to come in a more effective way and a more realistic way than they have done so far. So I really encourage our governments, come, we want you to. We want you to come and protect us. I am a citizen and I want my governments to come and protect me and the future that I possibly will have.
That is, I think that's such an important aspect of the conversation, and probably one that we could fill an entire new panel with. But maybe, let's take it back to a different aspect that you already mentioned, Stephen, which is products that sort of use more energy than they save in their production. And how do you make sure that your product doesn't use more energy than it saves?
It's not just for the Clear Sky collection, I would say. As I described earlier, we have been very much working on being carbon neutral with offsetting and production, have been certified for that in September 2022.
Definitely, there's a lot that can be done there in the future. Let's take a quick look at the measures that you're currently implementing in action.
Minimalism is an integral part of our DNA and an important principle in our use of raw materials. We recycle our water several times during the production cycle, treating over 27,000 gallons every day. Through this extensive conservation of water, we are able to maintain our rigorous production standards while protecting the natural environment around our headquarters. The full potential of water emerges in nature and on the Silhouette Group's grounds in combination with the sun. The sun's energy is an essential factor for our sustainability. Our headquarters' rooftop solar panel systems produce over 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year. And step by step, we are realizing our clear vision for a sustainable future.
So Arizona, I know you work with a lot of different brands. What has stood out to you with respect to the search for sustainable solutions?
What stood out for me in everybody's search for sustainable solutions is that there is in general a lot of confusion in the fashion space, whether it's in the manufacturers or in the consumers. What do we choose? What is better? What isn't better? Like the recycled plastic conversation that we had just now. It would have been great if 40 years ago that conversation had been had and officialized. And like, we have decided that recycling plastic as the kind of fix-all, end-all solution actually isn't the best option. So let's look at other options sooner. I think that this confusion is real. And I don't want to put any blame or shame on anyone for this. It's just real. We need to accept that it's there. And I think what I've found in my own little way is the solution for confusion is to understand context. When you look at the bigger picture and you fill in the gaps in your knowledge to understand as much as you can about all the impacts on every stakeholder, whether that's a whale. So the impact of transportation on whales is actually really high. Did we know this? Probably not. So whales are swimming in the ocean all the time, and all of our human big ships are going above them. And those ships make a lot of noise, so much noise that these beautiful, majestic animals who communicate through sound waves are confused. They can't find each other because they can't hear each other because there's too much noise pollution in our oceans. Are we considering this as a major impact of transportation and logistics? No. Should we? Yes. When you understand context, you can make a very different decision.
I feel like that complexity and that confusion that this can cause is something that we keep coming back to. Stephen, is there anything in terms of best practices that you can share on how to deal with that?
Yeah, I guess so we've been talking to consumers quite a lot recently and the general public about biotechnology and sustainable science as it's sort of coming online at the moment. And I think just the thing that really struck me was people don't realize how much of everything we use every day comes from fossil fuels. It's over 96% of everything we use on a daily basis comes from fossil oil currently. I think that's crazy. And the only reason that is the case right now is because there is massive financial levies that are given to petrochemical companies at point of sale, and that translates to cheaper products to the consumer, which is great. So the bio-based technologies that we and others are bringing into the market right now just can't compete financially right now. And that is because there are no financial levies in place for bio-based or sustainable products. So the most powerful tool that we have at our disposal right now is the consumer. So as soon as consumers start demanding sustainable products and will only purchase ecologically friendly, bio sort of degradable and biocyclic products, it changes the dynamic and it accelerates forward these sorts of technologies at a way that will solve the climate crisis in the small amount of time we have.
Let's talk about that consumer perspective. So, Will, would you say that sustainable glasses are now competing with conventional ones? Or is this going to remain a niche product for a sub-selection of particularly environmentally conscious customers?
I'd say until the launch of Clear Sky, it definitely was sort of a bit more of a niche product, because from the different factors we've talked about, even, yes, getting the story right of it being sort of eco and sustainable is really important, but the end product, there was always a compromise to the patient. So you had to have someone who's really, really sort of thinking about how important sustainability is to have to compromise on the product to purchase it, whether it be the choice of style, the choice of color, the choice of durability. Now with Clear Sky, you can browse a collection of frames and unless you knew that it was the sustainable product, you couldn't tell that it was, which is what we need. We just need it to become normal, that actually that beautiful frame that you can have in different colors, different styles is sustainable, is really important, and it will just become more and more normal.
Arizona, would you say it's ever okay for customer experience to take priority over sustainability in any aspect?
I'm niche, I know I am, and I allow my sustainability priorities to take priority over everything else. I'm unusual, but this is what knowledge does. I know enough now that I don't want the product that I know caused harm. I don't want it so much that even if visually I like it, I actually desire something else. And that is a really important transition that happened to me. I didn't used to be like that. And it can happen to everyone because I'm pretty normal, actually. If it happened to me, it could happen to anyone. So I think we do need to focus on education a bit. We need to understand where do things come from. I invite supply chains as a topic because I find them fascinating. But there are many different entry points. That was mine and maybe yours, but there are so many different entry points. You could look at animal welfare and be like, okay, that's big for me. That really touches a chord. Let me understand what impact everything in my life has had on animals.
Your charity Dirt actually aims to make that more sustainable. In your experience, do customers care about whether or not companies partner with charities like that? Is that something that customers look at when making a buying decision?
I think if it's visible enough, they do look at it. If it's not visible, if it's not on the shelf, they don't see it. So I do think that we as an industry in fashion need to become more outward facing about our giving and about our participation in schemes and solutions that are really thinking about the future. I think I've now started this charity Dirt 3.5 years ago, and I've had some support from the fashion industry, but not nearly as much as I thought, actually.
So coming back to this idea of really circularity and also to the idea of really taking context into account.
Yes.
Atisa, how about at Silhouette? Is there ever anything more important that takes precedence over sustainability?
I mean, an eyewear product, on the one hand, is, yes, it's a statement because you want to look in a certain way, but it is a medical product at the end. It's very important that from allergic factors, from hygiene factors, it sort of complies with medical terms and what the consumer needs. So that's something which we even put at the forefront before we talk about sustainability. But a sustainable factor is a second dimension of feeling good, is the feeling good of making a conscious decision. And that's where we want to bring the consumer to, not just choose something where you look good and feel good, but that you also feel good from a purchase factor. I think that's the next step where we want to go in this journey.
Will, as a customer, if I'm just looking for a sustainable choice in eyewear, if I'm an environmentally conscious customer who just wants to make the best choice, what do I look for?
Again, it's looking to make sure that the signposting is right in the store so that patients know exactly where to go for the right product. We've also got to make sure that there is the right amount of choice to fit what we need to fit on the patient, because as you said, we wear a product so we can see better. So I need to be able to adjust them and fit the right lens for the product. So seeing a good optician to get the best advice is important. It's what we're there for.
Stephen, what would you tell someone who's just looking for a sustainable purchasing decision?
Yeah, I think like many companies have declared their sustainability ambitions for the next couple of years. So really hold the companies that you're purchasing from to account based on what they've promised in the last couple of years. Because as I mentioned before, the consumer is our biggest tool and sort of our biggest weapon to really help drive forward these technologies that are going to ultimately help us become more sustainable, solve climate change. And we just quite frankly don't have enough time to do it, and we need all the help we can get.
And Atisa, that's something that you emphasize heavily in your communication, isn't it?
Yes, we just started now, I have to say. From a brand perspective, as a company, as a Silhouette Group, we have talked about our communication, sustainable communication in the past, but now with the Clear Sky collection, which is just the first step, so you can imagine what's coming. We are trying to really answer all questions the consumer might have.
Arizona, any motivational last words? You were so optimistic earlier. I feel like you might be the perfect person to, give us an optimistic ending to this discussion.
Yes. The one thing I would say that's easy that everyone can do to make their lives more sustainable and therefore our planet more sustainable is to read the label before you buy anything. What is that thing made of? It's not hard, and it's actually quite interesting. And when you start reading labels, you won't understand all the names, which is totally normal and fine. Google them. Start to understand what they are. You can read the label, and it does really help to guide you on what you want to buy and what you don't want to buy. That's true for food, it's true for eyewear, it's true for fashion, it's true for interiors, it's true for everything.
And that's actually really heartening to hear that, we've established it's such a complex topic, but with a little bit of responsibility from each and every one of us, with, brilliant research being done that is really innovating the way that we do things, with commitment from companies, we can actually manage to build a better future and build towards something better. So I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you all so much for taking the time for being here, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.